Is 2 million enough for retirement? Yes. In fact, in most of the United States, it'll last you about 2 times more than you'll need in retirement for the average American. But how can you come up with your retirement number? Well, it depends. One of the most commonly used formulas for coming up with your retirement number by certified financial planners is the 4% rule, or by multiplying or determining your expenses that you'll have to cover in retirement, multiplying that by 25, as you can see here, and that gives you your retirement number if you rely solely on your retirement savings, not including any residual income you might have, or if you plan to get Social Security. So here's what that breakdown might look like using this simple 4% rule. As you see here, applying the 4% rule and $2 million in retirement, you'll have $80,000 that you can pull down, and likely or 90% chance that you will likely not exhaust in your retirement years, according to this simple 4% rule formula. The average retirement age in the United States is 62, and the average life expectancy is around 78. This, of course, varies around the United States. However, that means that upon retirement, most Americans will need their retirement savings to last about 20 years. Now, about 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement. If they wanted to reach this retirement goal of $2 million, here's how much they would need to save each month, assuming a 7% return. Now, if you've never calculated your retirement number, that might be an oversimplification of your specific needs. Fortunately, more recently, they just released the minimum quality of life, which you can find on this website, which defines the true cost of economic well-being by family size. We can then use the 4% rule or a 25% multiplier to see how much the average American might need to save in retirement based on family size. When you visit this website, you can scroll down to that MQL index and you can find cost by family size according to housing, healthcare, food, transportation, and other important costs, not just limited to some of the more basics that you see in some of these retirement calculations. Here's what that looks like. Now, based on that information, we can use our simpler times 25 multiplier. For example, single with no children, here's what that multiplier would look like. Or 44,737 times 25 is about 1.1 million. I'll go ahead and add that 4% rule or the 25 times multiplier for all family sizes for the minimal quality index shown here. You might be wondering why I chose 7% besides the fact that it's a pretty conservative estimate of returns, but I like this simple infographic on the Financial Independence Retire Early movement or the FIRE movement here by Lexington Law. Now this calculation should look familiar to you, or the 4% rule, where we multiply 25 times our expected expenses in retirement to come up with our retirement goal or our retirement number. They then provide estimated or potential returns based on type of investment type. Let's go by each investment type. As you can see here, looking at checkings or savings, although I think you can get a slightly higher return, probably around 3 to 4% if you use a high yield account. Moving down to money market accounts, between 1 to 3% or higher. You might also be able to use your bank to buy certificates of deposit or your local credit union, expecting returns of 3 to 5%. Moving here to bonds and investing in mutual funds, which is where I pulled my expected or estimated conservative 7% return. As you see here, a shown reflection of 5 to 12%. As a reminder, using the 4% rule or a 25 times multiplier, here's how much you could expect your retirement savings to last you, or how much you can expect to draw down each year without about a 90% chance of not exhausting your retirement savings in retirement using that 4% rule. Fortunately, for many of you, I have good news that many of you don't need to save $2 million for retirement. In fact, it might look a little bit more like this. CNBC estimates that you only need about $700,000 for retirement if you were living only on your retirement savings in about half of the United States. Based on that study, you can find your state in the table that I created for you here. But keeping in mind that about 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement, I also went to investor.gov, which has a free both savings goal calculator and investment goal calculator for compound interest that you can use. You can find a link below. And here's how much you would need to save each month based on the decade that you start if you want to reach that minimum $700,000 for savings recommended by CNBC, or is $1 million enough for retirement, which you can find here on the right. You can find each of these articles available on CNBC are linked in the video description below, including how much you need to retire in every state, including how much $1 million will last you in every state in the United States, how much $1.5 million will last you in every state, and an estimate of how much $2 million will last you in every state in the United States. Now, looking back at average net worth, and if you haven't calculated your average net worth, there's a free calculator below, which you can find at NerdWallet. Average net worth is assets minus liabilities. And Harness Wealth just did an analysis of average net worth in the United States, updated for 2025. Here's their breakdown by age of head of household. Using that same data, here's a table with a little bit different age range by age of head of household, where you can find your average net worth, keeping in mind that median net worth, or the net worth in the middle, is about 190,000. So if you have a median net worth of 190,000, you make more than 50% of Americans. Average net worth, which is skewed higher by outliers, is around $1 million for households in the United States. Keeping in mind that these figures do include primary residence. So why is that important? I'll talk about the cost of living, especially as it pertains to housing costs in the United States and how much it has increased recently later in this video. Now, in fairness, when you look at just retirement savings for Americans around the United States, for example, this study here from the average American retirement savings from Northwestern Mutual found that Americans do recognize that they are saving too little based on what they think they should be saving for retirement, especially when you look at their average net worth, not including their primary residence. Here's a breakdown of Americans' average savings for retirement by decade. Here it might be helpful to understand what Americans consider wealthy or rich in the United States, so we can have some parameters to work with. Americans think $2.5 million in net worth is wealthy in the United States, and here's a breakdown by generation. For comparison, here's average net worth for American households. You would expect that married households would have about 2 times the wealth of single households, but because of their combined savings and compound interest, and that most of these will then eventually have a primary residence to add to their average net worth, they actually have about 3 times the wealth of these other households. Couples with no children, also known as dual income no kids or DINK, have a net worth of about $400,000, shown here at the top, compared to about $250,000 for couples with children, all the way down to about $50,000 for single with children. While net worth is more based on what you keep, Americans were also asked about what they consider financially successful, broken down by generation, and on average, financial success in the United States is a household income of $270,000 according to this survey, whereas to be rich or financially wealthy in the United States, Americans thought, broken down by generation here, you need an average household income of at least $520,000. Both of these figures is significantly higher than the average salary we see in the United States, with a breakdown by age here. And of course, those figures are going to vary significantly around the United States based on cost of living in that state, educational attainment, and type of job you work, with the median worker in the United States making about $45,000 up to about $60,000 for full-time workers around the United States. And here's a quick breakdown of individual earnings for women, for men overall, and y'all also asked for a breakdown of single men versus married men, with married men having the highest earnings, peaking around over $80,000 to over 6 figures for married men in the United States. We can also take a look at household income, with median household income being around $80,000 and average household income being around $114,000, with a breakdown of median household income here on the right by age of head of household. And finally, the U.S. Department of Justice issues an annual breakdown of income earnings by number of earners in the household. Here's a breakdown by state. And here's a breakdown of the middle class in the United States, using a popular definition by Pew Research Center, or 2/3 to 2 times median household income. Using that definition, we can then find the middle class range in each state around the United States for household income, or the income you need to be middle class in every state. Here is Massachusetts to Florida, and North Dakota to Mississippi. So with all this in mind, average net worth, average income, we can now better answer the question, is $1 million enough for retirement? And I still say the answer is yes. If for no other reason that millions of Americans retire with less than $1 million every day of the week. In fact, millions are doing it right now. We can look at baby boomers for what retirement might look like in the coming years in the United States. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, about 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement, so we can talk a little bit about what retirement life will look like for them in the United States. Here's an estimate of how much they would need to save each month by decade, starting from zero, according to CNBC, that estimated you need a retirement of about $700,000 in the United States as of 2025, as well as how much they would need to save each month to reach the retirement goal of $1 million based on decade of starting with $0 saved for retirement. However, even when we look at Americans who are saving for retirement, even by their own estimate, many of them do believe they are not saving enough for retirement. Fortunately, the news does get a little bit better when we look at net worth, especially inclusive of primary residence. And the reason that is a lot of people practice, especially middle class in the United States, build, borrow, die, where they build assets throughout their life, thinking of buying home or saving for retirement, borrow against those assets, and then if they've set up an estate plan, die, and then turn over those assets using their estate plan to either pay off any debt that they may have or turn over those assets to family, friends, or even through donation. For a more accurate estimate of retirement in the United States, we can look at baby boomers, many of whom will be turning 65 this year or have already reached eligible retirement age. And similar to the rest of America, about 1/3 of baby boomers have $0 saved for retirement, and so they will rely primarily on Social Security benefits, or a benefit of about $28,000 for men or $21,000 for women. And in 2025, DOGE released the estimate from the Social Security Administration of the monthly benefit Americans receive from Social Security benefits in the United States, which you can find here on the screen. All of which seem to align with Business Insider's estimate that about 50% of Americans over age 65 have an income of less than $30,000 a year, not including their primary residences, for those individuals that add the primary residences to their net worth. So is $1 million enough for retirement? I'm still going to say yes, as I did in the beginning of the video, at the end of this video, and an estimate of how much $2 million will last you in every state in the United States.